Balma. Mike is with Hewlett-Packard and also with the Open Source Software Institute. Mike was here last year and is a well-known speaker in open source circles. I'd like you to give him the appropriate applause.
Appreciate that. I'm going to take a look. Does this come out? Yeah. Let's see if I can walk around with this. I'm going to take a look at government and industry collaboration, a number of different examples that are happening, sort of a different perspective on what's going on. The other thing that I'm going to do at the end of the talk is do a little raffle for those that are stick through the whole thing. And so to do that, I've got a little collection cup here. From So after we do a NetTop demo, we'll look at another collaboration effort in the training area where we're doing sim modeling and simulation, very sophisticated. And again, it's a joint research project with the U.S. government. Taking another look, the healthcare information system, a lot of people wouldn't really expect governments to be involved with that in the U.S. Certainly around the world, the governments are intimately involved. And so there's some unique things that are happening in that environment. And then also the cluster file system, just a brief highlight on how that interaction and government supporting open source development really can lead to some pretty cool things. We take a look at the Selinux ecosystem. How many people have heard of Selinux? Okay. So it is a pretty amazing effort. Part of what happened is there's an effort to make Linux more secure, and the way that it was done was in a modular way. So there's the Linux security module that was actually developed so that you could have different policies added to that, which is fairly unique among operating systems and forward thinking. And that's what really enabled the Selinux as a module. In fact, that was mainly developed by the NSA in conjunction with a lot of other developers. So Red Hat, a company called Traces, HP, and IBM are developers in this, but the NSA really led the bulk of the work and released it as GPL code. And so that's really the key there, as opposed to other environments where you might license it or provide it even under a Freedom of Information Act, which we'll talk about a little bit later. In here, released it as GPL code, which means it was compatible with Linux and could be integrated tightly into that environment. What's really important with any of these things, and even when we talk about standards, it has to be accepted by the community. So the community involves a lot of other folks. The OS providers, and Red Hat's really been the leading one there, but folks from Debian have also integrated this into their environment. Systems vendors, HP and IBM have been the main leaders. There are evaluation labs who actually test and make sure that it really does meet the security requirements that governments are requiring them on themselves. Certainly ISVs and policy developers or security policy developers. So there's been an ecosystem that's built up around this environment, which is really important because it means that it's going to continue to evolve and develop some neat stuff. One of the things that it does is it provides this mandatory access control. And what that means is in a normal system, when you have the kernel, if you're a super user, if you got root, you can get in there and you can pretty much do what you want to do. But in a highly secure environment, you don't want that. You only have access to what you're supposed to have access to. And therefore, the mandatory access control can be implemented through this SE Linux, turning it on. And so that's a real key element in terms of the technology. Again, NSA did this in conjunction with a lot of other parts of the community. It has been accepted into the kernel, and so all of the relevant hooks are there, and in fact it's in a lot of the distributions now, so you can use it. It's optional. You can turn it on or turn it off. It can be a little bit complex in terms of its implementation, but this is designed literally for stuff like the intelligence agencies or DoD or things like that. So it's pretty important. One of the unique things about the implementation is it actually provides finer grained control than previous security environments or trusted environments, whether it's domains or the types of files, a lot of flexibility in the parameters. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to get down to make sure that only folks who have the right privileges get to see what they're supposed to see. In fact, what's really unique is that most of the other operating systems just offered the discretionary access controls, and in fact, as of 2 years ago, that's all Linux offered. But with this added functionality, it added this mandatory access control, and then you can also do roles. So I'm a student, okay, I get this level of access. I'm an administrator, I get this level of access, and enforced through mandatory access control. So it's very secure from that standpoint, and all the way up to what they call the multi-level systems, which are oftentimes called trusted systems. And in the past, those trusted systems, whether HPs or Suns, were different operating systems, literally. So HP's version was a separate operating system from our HPUX, and that's the way it is with Sun system as well. So the unique thing about Linux is that it's been able to devise this mechanism that you can have not only multiple policies or multiple different implementations, SE Linux only being one, but it allowed it to be able to go through the whole range, so that if you're developing applications for this, you just have to develop it for the standard environment. And so it gives benefit to the whole community who wants to be able to use the system. So a real benefit to the innovation and the collaboration that was put together with this. The couple of other elements here, I think I mentioned them. No need to develop for a special version. That's really important. It runs on industry standard servers from HP and other folks. And again, Red Hat's sort of doing a lot of leadership in this, and we're working with them very closely. In fact, we did a joint seminar, and you can see that at that URL. It's actually a video for much more in-depth review of this. I'm going to do a little demonstration later of a solution based on it called NetTop, as I mentioned, and so that'll be interesting. Another part of the whole ecosystem and collaboration is that for government agencies, particularly, actually DoD and civilian, they have to procure different systems. They can't just look and say, oh, we believe you on this data sheet that you meet certain levels of security. You have to go through these rigorous processes called common criteria. In fact, I'll ask, how many people have ever heard of common criteria certification? Okay. So it's a worldwide, in fact, I think there are over 20 countries that support this as a common criteria for security certifications. And It's very rigorous. I mean, literally costs up to $1 million to be able to go through this, and so. But what it allows you to do is then now Linux can be sold into these environments and used where they had these standards. We talked about standards. Well, there's a standard for purchasing too. You don't just trust that Microsoft or Linux, for that matter, can meet the standard. You have to prove it, and that's what these common criteria certifications do. We went through that with both Red Hat and SUSE at what they call this CAP level, and that's useful for most implementations within a government. But there is this higher level of security, this multi-level, they call it LSPP, and even there they require a higher level of level 4 versus level 3. So that's even more difficult, and in fact we're in the process right now of working with the community, including all the folks on that previous slide, and it's an open environment where if you want to contribute, you absolutely can, to add more functionality to be able to meet this level of certification. And we're going to start that certification this quarter, so in the next couple of months here, and it's actually going to be on a future version of Red Hat. So we really are getting ahead of the curve here so that when it comes out next year, actually at the end of this year, we'll be able to have a certified and be able to use in very sophisticated environments. And I guess the other comment I'll have about that is that part of what's wonderful about this is even if you don't need the highest level of security, this has actually gone through added vulnerability testing and things like that. So it gives greater assurance to everybody who uses Linux that there's fewer security holes in there that people can poke through. Doesn't mean that it's perfect, but it continues to improve it. All right, so I'm going to move to what's a solution based on this. What can you do with this? One problem is that folks who have like secret and top secret, they have different levels of security that they need to access. Typically they're on actually different systems. And there are different ways to solve this problem, but oftentimes you have to separate your networks, have extra hardware, extra PCs, isolate the workstations, a lot of problems in essence, or a lot of cost to be able to do that. And what you see is in a typical scenario in this environment, I mean literally you have a separate PC off of a separate network talking to the different environments. And that means desk space, that means power, that means cost, that means difficulty. But what you can do with this NetTop environment running the SE Linux technology is that you can integrate that onto one system. And so it's much simplified in this manner when you really have this need for the high degree of separation. And in fact, the architecture that we have used for this, and in fact, we worked in conjunction with the NSA on this and actually licensed the technology. Other folks can license it as well. We've added additional functionality. It adds two main components. One is the SE Linux component with the security policies, and I'll actually show you some of the security policies and how they're enforced. But it also adds the virtual machine, and we use VMware in this case, so that you can host different operating systems, whether it's Windows or Linux, and you can literally have that virtual machine or that operating system just talking to one network, whether it's secret or top secret, all on one machine. So it provides, again, a lot of separation and security in that environment. And in fact, the NSA has actually certified that for these high security environments. Talked about the security policies that I'll demonstrate a little bit. So one, it makes sure that the guest operating systems don't share information. I mean, that's just one of the policies you want to have, is if something is secret, you want to make sure that it doesn't move over into the top secret window and vice versa. So you have specific policies, and making sure that that goes through the networking, and also that the user can't actually reconfigure the machine. And this is kind of interesting how it's almost the opposite of what you would expect in an open source environment. I mean, users are supposed to have control and power and do whatever they want. Well, absolutely. In the development world, no problem. This code is open source. You can do whatever you want with it. But if you're deploying it like in a real business, whether it's a school or whether it's any other environment, users are only supposed to do what users are supposed to do, and so you need to put limits on them. And this provides an added level of security so that you can't do that. Here's an example of the desktop. In fact, let me move over to the demo. So what you see here is actually the typical Linux environment here. But what it's in is in a virtual machine environment where you actually have two operating systems. So there's Windows, there's Linux, and they're happy as can be. They get to do their own stuff and move to whatever each one wants separately, and the data stays separate but between those environments. Those are two guest operating systems running within what we call a nettop environment. And you know where you are, but there's actually, oh, you can't see it. That's interesting. It cuts off. Actually, you can probably see a little bit of it at the top, but for some reason it's going off the edge here. Right up there is a little red bar, and that indicates that you're actually within the Linux window. So it tells you that if I move over to the Windows, I don't know if you can see that, but it turns yellow, and so it tells you, okay, I'm in the yellow side. And that's a typical thing when you're in these top secret environments. It just helps you say, okay, am I in secret, top secret, where am I? And so it helps identify that within the environment. But the part that, here's some things that nettop does itself. A couple of things on the pop-up. Oh, boy, this really does squeeze it, doesn't it, John? It makes it tough. But over on the left, in terms of preferences, there's a couple of things. That actually should say make secure. And so right now we're in a development mode. And so if we press that, it would actually make the system secure so that we couldn't make any more changes. Right now we'd actually have access to root, and I can show you that the base environment here. On the back we can get an X term because that's nettop, and we're running Linux in that window. But if we actually made it secure, I couldn't do that anymore, so I'm not going to do that. That's one part of the demo you don't like to do because then it doesn't allow you to show as much. But you can also do things like what we call a chooser, and so you can assign different devices to different windows. So you can assign, for example, a CD-ROM to one particular device. So if you do it to the Windows operating environment, and say, okay, I'm going to attach that to that. I'm only going to be putting in, secret information in. This is my secret window. Put it in, and it says, hey, you've already got something in there. Make sure that it's at the proper level. So that's an example of how it actually checks to say, are you doing the right thing here in terms of enforcing the policies? So there's some additional preferences there. And you can add additional windows, but that's the basics. It provides that separation. It allows you to have multiple windows and integrate the PC in a very secure fashion. Actually, there is not, and that's a feature. That is a feature. It actually enforces that policy to say if they're two secret windows, yeah, you can copy and paste. But if it's a secret and a top secret window, no, you can't do that. And that's, again, it's kind of weird, but it's a benefit, or it's a feature that it does that, and it does that in a very secure way. it enforces whatever policy you set. And so if the policy allows it to go from top secret to secret, that's fine. But sometimes even policies are that to do that, it has to go through a third party, or two people have to confirm it, or whatever the policy is that you want to set, you can do that. So again, this is an example. Again, giving a lot of examples from secret, top secret, but you could use this in any other environment that made sense in a business context or academic, et cetera, where it made sense to limit some of the user's capabilities. So that's, it's simple in some respects, but the technology underneath is kind of complex to make it happen. What's that? I'm just moving from one laptop to another. In fact, it might actually display better. Because I've got one, laptop that is specifically for NetTop, and so I just want to keep that separate from the presentation laptop. In fact, I could do the presentation on the NetTop laptop, but for some reason the display is not working quite as well on the video. So it has been certified for use in these environments by the NSA up to PL4 level, which is pretty significant. And so we have deployments of this in the U.S. government and in governments in Europe as well. So this is a great example of a solution on top of collaboration, or actually multiple collaborations here, to be able to create this. And in fact, you could use this for firewall environments as well, VPN, other environments, and we've done some of these for customers. A lot of this is through our services folks that happen to do that. That happens to be the way we do it. Okay, I'm going to move to another example now in the collaboration of industry and government. This one happens to be around a training environment, training simulation. So in this case, we're working with U.S. Joint Forces Command, and we initiated a CRADA, or a joint research environment. And they do modeling and simulation for training purposes. So, if you're driving a tank or you're, flying, an airplane, how do those interact? And so they've got up to 50 different modules and the integration between those. And so it takes a tremendous amount of compute power, and it wasn't running on a Linux environment. So what we did is we've put together this joint research and development agreement, or CRADA, to be able to say, the Joint Forces didn't know whether Linux would work. We did. But to help do the research, we actually donated or provided 100 CPU system to be able to do that. And they're working to bring their own applications over. We're providing not only the systems, but the expertise on performance tuning and helping to port some of the third-party ISVs. So this is a sort of a good way around a chicken and egg, where with some of these environments where Linux is, Linux we think can work, we almost know it can work, but if the government in this particular case says, no, I'm not sure it really is, great, then you develop a CRADA, as they call it, and there's a joint research environment. And so we've seen this be very useful, and there are a couple of other examples of CRADAs that have been very effective. And this, in fact, is a 5-year CRADA that we're doing with them. Cassette collage is actually, call it a load balancing type environment. So if one application craps out, it will restart it. It helps deploy them. They're very sophisticated in that type of environment. Here's another example in the healthcare environment. How many people have heard of Vista or World Vista? Okay, a few folks. This is an interesting environment. Someplace many years back, people thought, gosh, you're not going to have a very complicated, very integrated application environment that's open source. Just where would it come from? How would you build a community? It's too narrowly focused. Well, one of the interesting things is that under the Freedom of Information Act, people, we got the access to the code that the U.S. Veterans Administration uses to manage their healthcare systems. And in fact, they're the largest healthcare provider system in the U.S., possibly in the world. And they just happen to have invested billions of dollars in a pretty amazing healthcare system. Extremely integrated, extremely efficient. I mean, something you don't always think of with government, but after 20 years, it actually is quite amazing. So what happened is that a small company, actually a couple of doctors, formed the company MedSphere, and they said, we've used this VA stuff, it's really good. Why isn't anybody using it? And they discovered that it actually was available and said, great, it's available, let's continue to build an environment around it. And there are a lot of other folks in the World Vista environment and developers who are participating in the development of this. HP is participating. Hospitals and clinics are typically more as an end user of the services, but that input is really important too, to say, does this work in my environment? How does it need to be customized? And so it really has created a pretty amazing system, and in fact is being used as a model for electronic healthcare records, because actually it provides that electronic healthcare record information, which a lot of other modern systems don't do, and is based on some of the standards, we talked about standards before, for interchange between other healthcare environments. So really is an amazing example of how you can create an integrated environment. And in fact, they've got a deployment on Linux in Texas, about, I think there are 3 hospitals and 2 clinics. It cost, actually there's no upfront capital cost, because you don't charge for the software itself. It's really the integration. And it's a significant amount of integration and migration from one system to the other. But the folks at Midland are very happy with this. One thing that I'll also say is open source software can run on lots of things. And there is also a Windows deployment of the MedSphere Vista software. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes I think we may get a little bit religious about, well, it's all got to be open source or it's not. Well, you know, open source, if it can save money, if it's a more effective way of doing it, great. And that's a good example here of where I think most of the deployments here are going to be on Linux and other open source software, but possibly not all. There's been interest in this from government of Mexico, Brazil, Thailand, governments around the world who are interested in using this because it's a great system. If it didn't work, who cares? Just like we talked about before, it's got to work. And then what are the costs? And then the implementation, how do you get the implementation? I'm going to move to another collaboration effort. Like, how many people are familiar with Lustre? Okay. So Luster's pretty amazing environment. A few years ago, it began as a small project, but then took off when the DOE, through a procurement, said, gosh, we want to use the Lustre environment in a high-performance computing environment. And HP and Cluster File Systems, who was working on that, put together a bid to be able to say, great, we can help move this forward to deliver the solution that you're looking for. And HP was the prime, Intel participated, but DOE funded it because they had a problem that they needed to solve, and they thought that the Lustre software could do that. And so this was a multi-million-dollar project. It was actually one of the first implementations in the supercomputer context was at Pacific Northwest National Labs. It's now one of the top supercomputers sites in the world. And the capabilities are pretty amazing, just in terms of the scalability of the data to petabyte levels, very high bandwidth capabilities, single shareable image. So really cool stuff that is just quite amazing. And one of the other real great benefits of this is that unlike supporting a proprietary development, anybody now can continue to use the Lustre environment and integrate it into their products or integrate it into other solutions. In HP's case, we actually include that in one of our, in our premier high-performance computing. So where we have 1,000 node implementations, we actually bundle the Lustre environment along with Linux, because that's just the most scalable environment. So really creating this flywheel effect of innovation where you can add benefit, get benefit, add benefit, get benefit, and it continues to grow. It really is a great model for innovation and solving problems. Not that I know of. Not that I know of, yeah. One thing that's interesting about Lustre is I'm not even sure I would recommend it right now for commercial operation. It is not quite fully stable. I mean, it does some pretty amazing things, but it's designed more for a high-performance computing environment. Now, it may evolve, and we hope it will evolve into a commercial, context, but it's more designed for high-performance computing right now. And so, since Microsoft doesn't play in that space, you would think that they would not be very interested. And there are certainly other, there are certainly other, cluster file systems out there, GFS that Red Hat supports strongly. So again, there's no one perfect solution for everything, as we heard about earlier. A lot of different solutions that are going to do some really amazing things. But again, point this out because it's a way that the government, it solved their problems, so they got benefit out of it. They were supporting an open source, environment, and so very positive and win-win situation. One other example, in fact, I'll keep asking questions. How many people have heard of gelato? And I don't mean the ice cream. All right. This is probably one of the better kept secrets, but it's really targeted at collaboration in a university environment. When the Itanium processor was coming out, HP took the lead in moving Linux over to Itanium, a 64-bit platform. And when we did that, we saw that there was a need in the industry, since it is a new architecture, to work with research entities around the world. So we decided to ask research universities around the world if you'd like to participate and do advanced research on Linux, on an Itanium environment, we'll help fund that. We'll provide systems, et cetera. And so we did that. And in fact, there were about 20 universities at the time that decided they would participate. And there were some others that were going to use Unix or use some other operating system. But the unique things about the Unix folks was, something clicked in their head. And they said, gosh, normally we would just go off and do our 3 years of research and, come up with something and then tell the world. But with Linux, we can share this. We can share it now. And in fact, you're doing advanced compiler work, and I want your advanced compiler because I'm doing advanced networking work, and you're doing security work, and I want to work with you. And so what we did is we created a foundation or a federation. You can go to gelato.org right now, and they have advanced compilers, advanced networking, optimized applications for an Itanium architecture. It's all open source, so that'll be able to run on other microprocessor architectures, but it really has, it's grown. I believe SGI is now part of it, Intel is part of it, BP is a sponsor. So again, because it was open source and people could collaborate, they will and they do. And it's the flywheel effect of innovation that's going on around the world. That's a pretty amazing part of this. All right, OSSI. How many have heard of OSSI? Okay. That's actually, I'm on the board of OSSI. It's a nonprofit that focuses on open source and government, a lot of it federal government. And here are some of the projects. One was working with security, doing actually FIPS security, so it's the specific certification that you need in regards to cryptography, and so we were doing that with OpenSSL. And again, that was kind of interesting in that we were collaborating with IBM and other folks in that process. And what's also interesting is, although we did it on Linux, it also will work for Unix or other environments that support an OpenSSL application. So kind of interesting, useful. In fact, the government has a little bit of a problem. When we did the CRADA with the Navy through OSSI, Navy wanted to find out, okay, how much open source software are we using? How much Linux are we using? Where are we using it? Is it useful? We did this about 4 years ago. And so, again, as part of a joint research, we wanted to know how much they were doing. They wanted to know, so it was mutually beneficial. And they found that they were using open source software a lot more than they thought they were. And in fact, not necessarily following all the policies that they had, because some of those policies say, well, you need to have things at the FIPS 140-2 certification to prove that it is the security that it is, that it says it is. And so that actually spawned some of the activity for certification to make sure that it really met the needs that the government was using it for. The third item down there is the Mississippi Automated Systems Project. It's kind of an interesting one, more of at a state level, a jail management system. And based on Linux, Apache, MySQL, it's interesting in that the intention of OSSI and working with the University of Mississippi in particular, or I guess University of Southern Mississippi, to be able to create open source software that not only Mississippi can use, but other states can use. So this is intended, once it's complete, to go into, there's a website that hosts government open source applications, and then other governments can utilize it and be able to do that. So it's kind of a neat environment, and it's sort of the tip of the iceberg for state government who is interested in supporting an open source environment that they can give and get and reduce their costs in that process. One of the things I'd also like to mention is, from HP's standpoint, one of the things that we've done to embrace Linux and open source is that we've created something we call Linux reference architectures. Of course, we have lots of hardware working with Red Hat and SUSE as key distributions, but we also work with other distributions. But we've created a tested stack through middleware all the way up through things like MySQL and JBoss. And that's been a lot of our contribution, is how do we test this, how do we integrate this and deliver this for customers. And so we've got both commercial and government customers in this Linux reference architecture environment. Certainly there's a lot of deployments of Apache and MySQL in governments. This is just another step to make it more mission critical in this environment. And somewhat in conclusion, I really think the barriers are being broken in Linux, and particularly open source now. Linux has broken a lot of the barriers, but open source, as we've seen in another number of cases, is really starting to take hold. People are seeing that open source means more than just Linux, and Linux does not mean it's just open source. And by government and industry collaborations, there can be beneficial benefits to all parties involved. So we're really pleased to be participating in the open source Linux environment and in the community. And in fact, I want to thank you for your time. And we do have some time for some questions before the raffle. Any questions or any thoughts, comments about other projects that folks are doing in a government environment? Yeah. In the open business. Great. So, and in fact, I'd heard that TUI was actually considering it at one point as well. Okay, so they have implemented it them internally or just in other locations around? Okay. Yeah, it's amazing the dispersion. Because it's open, people have access to it. You know, it's going to go all over the place. In fact, I had somebody from Pakistan send me an email saying they were interested in creating a open source healthcare system. And I said, well, there's several out there you might want to look at, and join those communities instead of rebuild your own. So it's pretty amazing. Any other? Yeah. Yeah. So depending on what you're trying to do, I mean, VMware may suffice. If you need the added security separation on top of it, NetType may be appropriate. But VMware, if you're just looking at virtualizing things within individual systems, that by itself can do a great job. VMware is not that difficult by itself. I mean, actually, the security stuff is a lot tougher to add on top of it. So it depends on how much secure. And VMware, I'm not sure what the server version is. I mean, you're talking, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. It's not, free. It is a commercial product. You can do it on desktops. I think, again, it's not trivial, meaning cost. It's a couple $100 by itself. So, that's why, this application where it's, I'll just say highly professional type of environment, they can afford that type of environment. They need that kind of environment. Students, I don't know whether VMware has a student license or something like that might make it different.
Take their
Mm-hmm.
and set it up.
That's right. That's right. They just released sort of a player type environment. That's an excellent point, where you've got, was it 30 days or something to set up your environment, and then in essence you sort of freeze it at that point, and you can use it for as long as you want, as long as you don't make any changes. So again, that's not open source software, but that is a useful piece. In fact, I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts. And that there is, I will mention another virtualization environment, which is a lot of effort being put into, called Xen. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with Xen. It is a different way. It actually runs underneath Linux, and so it can actually be a little bit more secure. A lot of the distributions are beginning to support it. I think Debian supports it at this point. And so Xen for an academic environment might be very interesting to look at, in terms of if cost is a significant factor. Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually
Xen source, right?
and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so I would definitely look into Xen if, but if you need a sort of a production environment and you're, got 1,000 students, you might want to go with a VMware, or start with Xen, or just, experiment it and see what you can do with it. Yeah. Xen does not support Windows. That may be an issue in the future. In fact, there's, again, some work. Everybody knows that they'd love to be able to get it to that, but I don't think Microsoft wants that to happen. So they're trying to figure out how to get that to happen. So we'll see how that happens as it evolves. But I think actually a lot of the Unix flavors are looking to support it. So it's sort of everybody but Microsoft at this point. And who knows, maybe a standard could be set that would allow everybody to be able to support it. In fact, that's an interesting comment before. I was listening to the standards, and I think part of the reality with standards, just to editorialize as long as I've got the mic, is that you actually I believe, need some of the proprietary development to do some of the innovation. Not all of it, but some of it. And oftentimes what happens is the rest of the industry catches up, and there are multiple alternatives, and that's when you need to set the standard, is for that broader interoperability. I mean, it'd be wonderful to be able to set a standard and everybody, collaborate and say, okay, let's all create a standard, but standards are really tough. really tough. Even, I mean, I've been working on the Linux standards base, and even the Linux standards base, you can't keep up with all the innovation that's going on in Linux itself to set the standard. It's in some respects, standards always follow the innovation. It's just very difficult to set that. I'm sure there are some other examples of, setting a standard that set the pace in innovation, but it's tough.
Innovation, standards, when a standard hits. Innovation, the term.
Yeah.
I'm really struck.
Hmm.
It seems. Perception or?
Somewhat. I mean, I've been involved for a number of years. I think part of it is, actually, it was commented that I presented last year. Actually, I didn't. So right, it was a different person, and so a different perspective, and I think it was a little bit, I'll call it visionary, or just a perspective on where things could be or would be, and I took a more, I'm going to call it practical, but here are examples of what's going on. I think that it does indicate sort of a maturity of some of these environments as well. In the early days, a lot of things were happening, but now you not only, I mean, we've been working with all these folks for several years. So it really is a matter of, when we could talk about it, could we say it was a success or was it in process? And so, I mean, we've certainly, for example, one interesting thing, just as to your point, last year at this time we were called, within HP, called the Linux organization. This year we're called the Open Source and Linux organization. So it's a recognition that we as an organization and as HP are working with more than just Linux. It's with other Open LDAP and Apache and MySQL and JBoss and Jabber and a lot of these components. And so I think from that standpoint, there is definitely within HP a recognition of maturity beyond Linux into an open source perspective. Yeah. Any other final questions before the grand raffle? Yeah, absolutely. Here's the. There's a Revolution OS DVDs. How many people have seen this? If you haven't seen this, this is, when I saw this 4 or 5 years ago, it sent chills up my spine. It was just incredible of Linus and Stallman and just, the founding entities and people and personalities as well within the Linux and open source movement. So one of the goodies is actually the guy who has run Linux at HP for quite a long time wrote a book a couple years ago on the business aspects of Linux and open source. So we have that. And as I call names, you can get to pick. So here are your options in terms of the goodies that we have. HP's done a lot of work with DreamWorks and a lot of the Disney and other movie studios and using Linux. And so In honor of that, we have a DVD of Madagascar, since I'm on an island, that was appropriate. Completely rendered, completely developed on using. Also got, this is one of my favorites, it's a porting guide from Solaris to Linux. Very, very technical manual, and it's quite useful. So with that, and you can see, actually I don't have all of that, I think there are 6 goodies. So where do you see? Oh, you know, it's. I think it's. I don't think it's showing anymore. Actually, I do have more DVDs. If card, I can. Not here. I'd have to send it to you. It was.